So we are here today with Mr. Stefano Inama, who joins us from Geneva, where he's just had a meeting with the LDC WTO group and the WTO Secretariat in preparation for the next WTO ministerial meeting to be held in Nur Sultan, Kazakhstan in June this year. So, Mr. Inama, can you give us an overview about the efforts to establish multilateral discipline on rules of origin?
Yes. You see, the point with rules of origin is that we don't have multilateral rules. For a custom officers, there are basic questions that you ask when the goods come for customs clearance. Where the goods is coming from, what is the value of the goods, and how do I classify the goods? Now, how do I classify the goods? We have a harmonized system, which is a custom nomenclature, which is a multilateral instrument used by all WTO members. For custom valuation, how much the goods are worth in order to apply the tax, we have the custom valuation agreement in the World Trade Organization. But for rules of origin, we have also a multilateral agreement in WTO. However, that agreement does not contain harmonized rules of origin. It was supposed to have an harmonization work program, but member states failed to get to a consensus. And therefore, at present, we do not have any multilateral agreement on rules of origin. It's a kind of no man's land. And this is quite difficult, makes life difficult for everybody, for governments, for business, and also for consumers.
And so how multilateral rules would be beneficial to governments, private sectors, and consumers, like you said?
Well, basically, from my practical experience, we have been advising governments while negotiating rules of origin. And my recent experience in the African context, while we are negotiating the African Continental Free Trade Area agreements, you have 50 more African states trying to agree on a protocol of rules of origin. However, this turns a very difficult exercise because there is no guidance, there are no multilateral best practices, there are no guidance on how to draft rules of origin. And therefore, the negotiations are going on, for days and days, and the outcome of the overall free trade area becomes somewhat prejudged because it was very difficult to get to an agreement in the absence of such multilateral rules. And also for business, the absence of multilateral rules of origin makes it very difficult because every FTAs has its own rules of origin. The EU FTAs have their own rules of origin, but they are different among each FTAs. There are similarities, but they are different at the same time. And they're also very much different from the US or Japan rules of origin that are contained in the different agreements. So we have, according to the WTO, hundreds of FTA agreements, which means that you have hundreds of different rules of origin. And for business, this is very complicated because if you are a company and you want to export to different countries, you have to comply with the rules of origin of these different countries, which are, according to your destination, if you export it to 10, 20, 30 countries, then you have to comply with 10, 20, 30 different rules of origin, which has a cost in terms of persons that they have to comply and also risks which come with.
But why is it then so difficult to get traction for movement at the intergovernmental level?
First of all, rules of origin are complex, very difficult to negotiate, and requires also input from the private sector, and this makes the issue on negotiating rules of origin quite unattractive for governments. But also, governments at times find interesting rules of origin because rules of origin can be used as a trade policy tool. The recent case of the United States-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Area Agreement, where rules of origin for the automotive sector has been used by the Trump administration as a trade policy tool to, according to Trump administration, to have more American jobs and more American cars built in America and not in Mexico. How this has been done? through rules of origin. So the governments are a bit ambivalent on negotiating rules of origin. If it is convenient to them, they can use rules of origin to get a specific trade tool, bilaterally or plurilaterally. But when it goes at multilateral level, they become hesitant in engaging into negotiations. Also because the research which could help this negotiation so far has not been effective in producing outcomes or results of research on what could be a text for multilateral rules of origin. And that's, I mean, also is another difficult part, because government would like to have a kind of text to start for negotiating. And this should be the object of research of the academic community, but also of business. If business is interested in having multilateral rules of origin, then, I mean, it should come forward to say, well, we have a problem here. But so far, I mean, these two forces have not joined into having a kind of impetus or significant traction on multilateral level.
And now I understand that you're on your way to Brussels to contribute to updating the Annex K of the revised Kyoto Convention. Does this mean that we can expect a ray of light at this difficult junction for the multilateral trading system?
Well, I hope so indeed, in the sense that there are 3 initiatives on rules of origin recently that are promising, so to speak. One is the action that the least developed countries, the poorer countries on earth, they have launched with the Nairobi decision on preferential rules of origin for least developed countries back in 2015. The work to implement this decision that has been agreed also thanks to the initiative of the least developed countries has started in the Committee on Rules of Origin a new lease of life, in the sense that now work has started to implement the content of this decision. And therefore, member states and delegation, they started to discuss for the first time since ages the need for multilateral discipline on rules of origin. It is a start, of course, because we are only discussing about preferential rules of origin for LDCs. But at least there is some traction at multilateral level on the issue of rules of origin. This is one of the initiatives. Another initiative, which always in the Committee on Rules of Origin in Geneva, is the initiative by the Switzerland, which is calling for transparency on the issue of rules of origin. Because rules of origin, in order to comply, you need to know them. And in order to know them, governments have to publish the applicable legislation. And sometime in WTO, the notification of the rules of origin, they go back to the beginning of WTO, back in 94, in 95, when the WTO was established. Obviously, there is a need to rejuvenate all this process, to have fresh notification, and that is another initiative which, again, brings up the issue of rules of origin at multilateral level. And last but not least, there is the initiative by the World Customs Organization to revise and update the Kyoto Convention. That's why I'm going to Brussels. And the Kyoto Convention is about customs procedures, and Annex K in Kyoto Convention deals with rules of origin. And that is the first another multilateral effort to restart and rejuvenate the text of the original Kyoto Convention back in 1974 and 2000 to adapt it to the present context of rules of origin. So there is very much hope that countries and also private sector, since the private sector could be represented in WCO, could act together and rejuvenate the Kyoto Convention and also expand the comment, so that the member states which are negotiating rules of origin, business that are using rules of origin, they can in the future have a common guideline, have a common framework to which refers when they negotiate or they have to comply with rules of origin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stefano Inama, for this really interesting interview. And thank you all for watching. Please let me remind you that you can find a former and future episode on the Global Governance Program website. Thank you.